Rafia, and I am a therapist and facilitator of group processes and trainings around the world. A very wide range from old-style encounter and primal and bioenergetic and men's and women's and Jungian and men and tantra sexuality groups and essence workshops and trainings and something called Path of Love, which has been a big passion of mine the last 25 years. And now I have a year-long training program called Working with People. We're talking about many years of leading seminars in many different places on many different subjects. And they tend to develop as I develop. And out of my own interest and my own personal exploration arises at some point the desire and the capacity to lead a group about that subject. I was in a crisis. I was in my early 20s. I graduated from UC Berkeley, had a relationship breakup, was really upset and unhappy and didn't know what to do about it. And I had the guidance and maybe the intelligence to seek help. And I ended up going to a group, and it was a men's bioenergetic encounter group. And within about 10 minutes, they had me out in the middle of the room expressing my anger, which was something that I was unable to do prior to that. And I remember walking out from the very first session and feeling like my life just changed. I just discovered some part of myself that I'd been cut off from. And I just went from that moment on deeply into meditation, deeply into group work, participating in all kinds of things which were on offer at that time in Berkeley. And I made the most of it. And I started to notice in myself, and I started to get the feedback from people that I worked with that I was what they called a natural. And I just had that capacity, it seemed like, to open up in that space, to be able to articulate myself really well and to be able to observe and reflect what I felt was going on in the surroundings around me. And all of a sudden I was like, I really do enjoy being in this group space. And so then the participation turned into trainings, which then turned into assisting some of these people, which then turned into leading my own courses and groups, and which has never stopped. And I'm still at it, and I still love it. I feel like I'm absolutely blessed to work with people. I get the opportunity to be with people at their very best. People come in with the intention of self-discovery, with the intention to be honest, to seek the truth. We provide a really good structure for them to do that in, and I get to have the blessing of seeing people flower and come in touch with themselves in ways that are not pedestrian and are not ordinary, they're extraordinary. And then the energy between people in the group who are in that space becomes something that is just so beautiful to behold and be part of that I love it. I love it. People ask me sometimes, when are you going to retire? And I say, retire from what? You know, I have no plan to retire. I love what I'm doing. Living in Berkeley in the mid-70s felt like the center of the universe to me. And I was aware of Esalen, and I visited it and various other places that were, to me, peripheral to the center, even though they were unto themselves really great places. I found all my needs fulfilled, and I got involved in communities and with people that were involved in Berkeley. So I was doing most of my work there, a bit in San Francisco and a bit in Marin County also. And of course, as it goes, you meet people, and then the work expands, and the invitations get, farther afield. But I felt like I was in a kind of Mecca situation in Berkeley at that time. It was a gathering place of other alienated souls from American culture, and we were really on all levels, social, political, spiritual, therapeutic, in a grand experiment is how I felt. My first LSD experience gave me a very clear understanding that what needed to be transformed was myself, not the world, and that I could spend the rest of my life blaming the world for what was making me unhappy, and that what really needed to change was me. And that was a spiritual experience. So at the core of it, there was something that was more looking for a spiritual answer, but I found out right away that the therapeutic tools that I was using, the Reichian character types, the body work, the open session work, was very much facilitating my meditation and the feeling of opening up inside and realizing my true nature. Therapy, I realized very early on, had an important function in opening me up. And so I was doing therapeutic sessions, and I was working on just things with my parents, my past, my body, my emotions, all of these things. But it was really more oriented towards spiritual realization. That was what was driving me. And I wasn't finding anybody. I didn't even have a concept of what a master might be. I was just going and listening to people talk. I think I tended more towards what's called the crazy wisdom traditions. That would be Trungpa, Gurdjieff, and eventually Osho. I remember reading a book of his and finally going, this is the one. Because he also included this understanding of humanity. It wasn't just about transcending and going beyond. Just going beyond wasn't that interesting to me. I wanted also the life and the juice and the passion and people. And I cared about people also. I still carried this strong social, political conscience. And I felt Osho spoke to all of that. I mean, he used to speak about Zorba the Buddha. And that's like being totally in life, but also, having this non-dual kind of connection and realization of your own divinity at the same time, but not going beyond, not rejecting. I was never big on rejecting life. I wanted to dive into it and taste it and experience it and be part of it. The human part was very important to me. So when I came in contact with his teachings, I was like, I found the person. And so in 78, I went to India for the first time. And it was just as I felt Berkeley was starting to wane in terms of that feeling of community, expansive consciousness. I was starting to feel, it's not here anymore. And then I arrived in India and I felt I had to pinch myself, like that I'd gone from one great gathering to the next great gathering that was happening. And that was kind of the peak of it at that point. People were pouring in from all over the planet. And I just felt like, oh my God, I am home. I arrived in Pune, and I was, in the first moment, the first day of seeing Osho when he came out to speak, and he was speaking in Hindi that day, and I didn't understand a word, but I still had the feeling like I'm in the presence of the rarest flower on the planet right now, and it just felt like a total blessing. And I felt like connected and in a kind of feeling of communion with the people that were there almost immediately. I mean, I had a couple of torturous nights as the question came, do I become a sannyasin? Do I take him as a master? Do I become a follower? And of course, my doubting mind and my Western conditioning and my loyalty to my past and to my parents and family and education and projections into the future were all objecting completely to jumping into this. And after a couple of sleepless nights, he was then speaking in English. I went to the discourse and I had this experience as though everybody else, and there were a couple of thousand people there, disappeared and he was talking directly to me. That was how I perceived it, because he was talking in such a way and about doubt and about the way it worked inside of us and the way it tethered us to the past and how you could bring awareness to it and see it for what it was. And it just made me go, yes. And I've never regretted it. I went in that day, said I want to become a sannyasin or follower of Osho, to get a different name. I was John at that point, and a couple of days later I was sitting in front of him and he gave me the name Rafia. And he said, your new name means God of Bliss. And of course I got a big smile on my face. I not only liked the name Rafia immediately, but being called God of Bliss was really great. And then he went on to talk about, you have to stay present to the point where you see God in everything, even the dog on the street, that you're surrounded by God. So he took away the specialness. At the same time, he gave me a very beautiful name, which I loved. And and it was a very powerful meeting with him. Touched me deeply. The first time I walked up to sit in front of him, as I walked up, I had the visual impression that he was about, 1.5 meters wide. Of course he wasn't, but it just felt like that was a kind of image of the solidity and the presence that I was coming close to. One of the beautiful things I loved about Osho was that he had a lot of the top therapists in the world working there, and he understood that the Westerners really needed to open up from the kind of conditioning we had in order to be able to meditate, in order to be able to really feel and sense and regain that sensitivity. And so I entered into the group programs, and then when I came through that, he invited me to start leading groups there as well. And then I was in a very amazing position at a young age to be having a full group every day, provided the people being provided by him, something I could never have created on my own. So I was working virtually every day with a full group of people, and in that, I got a tremendous amount of experience and education and guidance from him about it also, and in addition to going very deep into the meditation practice. Then, of course, I went on to Oregon, which was, for me, one of the greatest times of my life, even though there were some strange things going on there. And what happened at that point was that I became partners with a woman who was his caretaker and companion for many, many years. And the next thing I knew, I was living in the next room to him. And that was really, really a big transition for me, to go from the kind of anonymity of being one of thousands to being the man who was together with the woman who was 24/7 with him or had access to him like nobody else ever did. Her name was Vivek. And we were together through that period of time in the ranch. And then when he was deported from the country, I was one of 7 people who was on the plane with him that flew out, and I accompanied him around the world in the quest for a new home, where we were rejected basically in every country. Eventually, we had some long stops in various places, but there really was a concerted effort by the Americans to separate, to drive him back to India, basically. So after 9 months or so of traveling around, he went back to India, and then I followed, and we started the next round. And first we were in Mumbai, living in a film producer's house and having small gatherings there, and then we moved back to Pune again. So I was there for the whole ride, right up until he died, or left his body, as we call it. It's interesting that some people use the word cult, and I can understand it. It has all the earmarks of what a cult is. Personally, in my experience, I was one of the luckiest people on the planet, and I was pinching myself because it was so good. Like, can this be real? I understand that you can call it a cult, it depends on how you define cult. We were a group of people who were following a extremely charismatic, very intelligent, very spiritually enlightened, in my opinion, man who inspired me all the time, and it was focused on him. Does that make us a cult? Maybe. I don't feel defensive about it. Anybody can call it what they want. For me, it was a sangha, which is a word used for a spiritual community. It was a Buddha field, the field that surrounds a Buddha who's there. And whenever there's somebody who's coming forth and speaking on the level of truth that Osho was talking about, hungry souls are attracted to be there, and they arrive, and they don't want to leave, and they stay. And of course, the things that person says have a lot of influence on the people who are participants in that field, and are influencing decisions that people make. So by some definitions, it's a cult, so what? For me, it was a Buddha field. One of the beauties of Osho was that he was so eclectic. He understood the need for things to be embodied. And so a lot of the meditations and a lot of the things we did was to awaken the body. There was a lot of dancing. There was a lot of movement meditations, and so we were a group of people who were passionately in our energy and in our bodies. At the same time, and I got the opportunity to go through his library and see how well read he was, pulling out different volumes of whether it was Freud or Jung or Ascioli or whatever, and seeing all of his comments in the margins. He was extremely educated, he was a philosopher also. And so there was the awareness of Western philosophy and psychology, and there was awareness of what was the emergent stuff that was coming out in the, let's say, the psychological therapeutic field. And there was this deep, deep immersion that he had in all of the traditions of the East. And so he might be speaking for, 6 months about Buddha, or he might be speaking for 6 months about the poet Kabir, or he might be speaking 6 months about the Hasidic tradition or Jesus. And you felt like when he was really into it, like you were sitting with that person because he provided the insight and the understanding about the transmission that was coming through these different people. And as a result, there's like 400 or 500 volumes of books that are direct transcriptions of things that he said. So it was very eclectic. It wasn't like this is the way. He contradicted himself constantly, so you had to stay awake. It wasn't like he was pounding out a particular way or path. He was speaking to everybody, and he was inclusive of he called the path of love, the traditions that were more devotional and heart-oriented, and the path of meditation, which was more the vertical, the meditation, and he went very deeply into both. He's been known as the sex guru, and what his first book, I think, that created the big controversy in India was called From Sex to Superconsciousness. And he was willing to speak very, very openly about how religions and traditions had cut people off from this basic instinctive life force that is embodied, and a part of which is the expression of sexuality. And he said, for you to realize your full potential, you need your full energy. And so there was a lot of emphasis on awakening the body through dance and movement and body work, and also to come out of our repressions, our held back, our guilt, our shame around sex. And so we did. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful openness and gathering of people who were coming out of basically being conditioned in the 50s and 60s, early 60s, where there was a tremendous amount of repression and shame and guilt around sex. So the liberation aspect of it and the freedom of it was, I'm very happy to say I participated in that, and I met many, many beautiful women along the way and had a wonderful time with that sexual experience. But it was not about sex. It was about really awakening this full life force to be available also to the heart. He used to liken it to sex and life force are like the roots of a tree that then come up into the heart. And if they're cut off, the heart can't and love can't really open. And then from there, the energy arises to the head and the crown chakra, which is the communion with the divine and the blessings that come from that. There was a strong emphasis on doing group work. And one of the groups that was there, one of many, there was maybe 40 or 50 groups on offer at a time, but one or maybe there was 3 of them that were in an encounter form. And they were kind of anything goes. And they were led by really skilled therapists, but retrospectively, I would say the therapy that was being practiced at that point is primitive compared to what we know right now about trauma and the way that we work in these days. Personally, and I think I speak for most of the people who went through those groups, it was incredibly helpful. It was, and yes, they were scary, and I could imagine, and sometimes I think things went too far. You know, sometimes there was physical fighting in the group. Sometimes there was sex that happened in the group. Sometimes people were encouraged to do things that was too much for them. And there wasn't an awareness at that time really about trauma that I've been trained since in somatic experiencing trauma work, and it's essential to all the work that I do right now, that anything that happens in the work is not re-traumatizing to people. And so we need to create safe environments, and there's many markers and much understanding about trauma now that just wasn't there in that time. However, for my generation, which came out of the 50s really, there was also something that I felt like we also needed some tough stuff, and I benefited from it, and I would say most all the people I know did, and some people I'm sure got traumatized by it because it was a bit of a free-for-all. And it wasn't happening only in Pune, it was happening all over the States. I don't know what was happening in Europe. And it arose out of the work that was happening in Esalen, the encounter group. And there was no awareness at that point really of trauma and how it affects the nervous system, and the necessity to create a safe environment for people in order to not traumatize them. And it is very possible with that knowledge to work as we do now, still on a deep level and not traumatize people. So the skill level and the evolution of therapeutic work that's happened over the last 30 years, let's say, is immense. And I would love to see where it'll be 30 years from now. After Osho had passed and I was still leading groups in Pune and still living there, I became aware at some point of the work of a man named Hamid Almaas. And I read a book by him, and I was just amazed at the map that he had developed between personality or ego and being or essence. And that he had discovered that himself, along with a man named Faisal Muqaddam, through their own self-inquiry. They were also from Berkeley. They were originally from Kuwait, and they were scientists, and the basic method of science is inquiry, to question, to not know, to discover, and they applied scientific skills of inquiry to themselves at a certain point. They dropped their schooling. They were each about to get PhDs, one in physics, one in mathematics, and they just dove in and just inquired basically 24/7. And they developed this amazing map. And when I read it, it was answering questions about people and behavior and giving me understanding that I didn't even know I didn't have, answering questions that I didn't know I didn't have. And I wrote a letter to Almaas and asked him if, he would come and lead a group with like 25 experienced therapists and pass on his thing. And I got a very beautiful letter back to him where he said, well, unfortunately, my work doesn't lend itself to the short term, but thank you very much for reminding me that there are people out there who have a lot of experience and are ready to just gobble it up. I'm just not ready to do it yet. And so I was kind of like, well, okay, I guess I have to read the books. And then that summer in San Francisco, I met Faisal and had a session with him and invited him to come to Italy. And we got this group of people together there, and he gave us this transmission of the introductory work to what he calls essence work. He calls his work diamond logos work. And it is a tradition that comes out of the Sufi background called the Lataif. And it just blew the socks off of all of us. It was so deep, it was so on point, and it offered a methodology that can be adapted to almost anything that would come up inside somebody where they could inquire and come to their own personal kind of resolution rather than finding the answer external to themselves. And that had a huge impact on me. huge, and it still does. And it's still very much influencing my work. And then in the midst of all of that, I also went to California and participated in a group called Miracle of Love. And because a number of my friends who had been on the ranch in Oregon moved down to California, and they got involved with this work, and they're writing to me and saying, come on, you have to come and do this. And I was resistant at first because I was resistant. But I did finally decide to jump in because I realized the only reason I wouldn't do it was because I was afraid. And that meant to me that I had to do it. So I did, and it was wonderful. It just opened me up so deeply, and it really awakened my longing again for the truth, which I feel like had gotten covered over with identity in being a therapist, and after Osho's death, a certain kind of dullness started to come. I felt like my flame went down. And in the Miracle of Love, the flame came up and started to burn really passionately again. And I came in touch with that seeker that had brought me to Osho. And so I stayed and participated in that work for a couple of years. And then I realized that it wasn't my spiritual home. And so I asked the founders of it, a woman named Kalindi and a woman named Gail, if Tari and I, who is my working partner to this date and whom I've known since probably 1980, if Tari and I could take that work back to Pune because we felt it was really needed. We felt like there was a kind of flattening out that was happening there after Osho had gone. People were still living there, but we didn't have that same inspiration. And to my surprise, they said yes. We took the basic structure of that, and we spent a year going through every part of it and refining it, in our mind, refining it, changing it, wanting to see if it was consistent with Osho's work. So Osho had talked for years about what he called the path of love, which was a way of devotion and a way of passion and a way of opening up and moving actually into prayer. And so we created our own group and we started running it in Pune. And then after about 3 years, we just took it out into the world and we haven't looked back since. It's a very beautiful piece of work where people feel very safe and very held and very able to go with the deepest passion and longing for self-realization inside themselves and look at what is it in me that's preventing that from happening. It's a no blame, no victim group. It's all about what's in here. And we have trained people to be facilitators in it who are just excellent. And I'd say we're pretty much batting 100 after 26 years. I mean, virtually everybody who goes through it comes away and says, wow, that was life-changing. People open up, they cry, they laugh, they shout, they move into whatever they need to move into. And we work very closely and intimately with people. And we have about an equal number of staff as participants. So people are really held in a very beautiful field to go through the process that they need to go through. The name Path of Love, we took it really because Osho talked about it as a particular way for self-realization. And it fits with the understanding that's in the background holding of this process. But on the very first night when people come, I say to them, Path of Love sounds like this flower-strewn path, and, and it's not. It's very, very intense process. And what we say is all the barriers are on my side. So we activate people's personal longing. It takes them in the direction of what they're longing for. And then you have to look at, well, what's keeping you from the realization of your longing? What is it in you that is blocking that realization? And that's where the group gets really interesting, because the group itself allows, maybe we have 40-something people in the group, and everybody's going through the same structure, but everybody is going on their own path and in their own direction in dealing with the issues that are relevant and important to them to be able to realize their longing. And I would say almost everybody has that experience of having a breakthrough during it, and having some kind of moment of feeling of that love is what holds us together. Love is the field that is between us. It's the truth of who we are, and people experience that. Can they sustain that in their lives? And the answer is no. You could even say it's similar to a drug or medicine experience, in a way where you open up and you realize your potential, but you still have to do the work, But the realization of your potential, you can never forget. It will haunt you to the day you die when you're not in it and when you're not living it. So it's very important, and we try to provide ongoing work for people and support for people. And that's an ever-developing area for us to help keep people involved. And we have people who've been, who did the first one 26 or 7 years ago, and they're still right in it. When you meet somebody, another person who's done Path of Love, there's an immediate sense of connection. There's a shared experience from it. You know something about that person, that they've walked through that fire and they've done that work. And so there is a global community, and there's many things that are happening in Australia, America, and Europe that are designed to support, and in Brazil also, to support people who've gone through the process. One of the things that we do talk about and try and activate in people is something called the longing. And longing is generally part of, or yearning, or some people even call it divine discontent, where you've realized that you're not living your potential. You've had experiences in your life where you did feel very aligned with your potential, or you had a peak experience, and then you've settled for a kind of status quo of the personality, let's say fixation, which creates a certain hunger and passion. Anybody who goes on a spiritual quest, I think, has some degree of longing going inside of them. Even if it's gone down to a very small flame, we have a way in the Path of Love to bring that longing up so that it starts to burn brighter and brighter. And what it's addressing really is the pain of separation. And what is meant by that really is that when we're living in our identity as a personality, we are by and large separate from the spiritual truth of oneness or connection. And that's a painful experience on some level. And once you start to feel the pain of that separation, because you've experienced what it feels like to be home, to be one, you've had an ecstatic experience, or a love experience, or an experience with nature, or something you had very strong as a child. And then as we slowly fixate more and more into our personalities, which we don't make wrong in the Path of Love. We're not there to kill the ego. We're very compassionate towards the personality because basically we understand that it is an intelligent strategy to survive in the environment you grew up in. The only problem with it is we no longer live in that environment and we continue to relate to life as though we are in that environment. And so we stay stuck in the separation that comes from the personality's strategy to survive, which does not represent our nature, our true nature or our essence. And in that process, there's often a lot of wounding and a lot of hurtness. And as people start to, let's say, the flame of their longing gets stronger, they're automatically drawn to those situations in life which have formed them in a way that's keeping them separate. And as they dig into that and they start to expose that and bring that out into the open, a lot of emotion comes from people. And we allow the emotion. We're not necessarily pushing people to be emotional, but we understand that that's part of the process. It's like, if you would understand Almaas's theory of wholes, it's like going into the deficiencies that are underlying our personality. And in order to come back to the essence, you have an emotional layer to go through. And people are emboldened to do that by seeing the others doing it and by the support that we give them. And so we're always also emphasizing the body. It's not just a psychological process where somebody will come out with something and they'll start talking about it, and we would say, well, where do you feel that in your body right now? Or what do you notice in your body as you're talking about that? And somebody might say, oh, yeah, I notice a big heaviness or pain in my heart right now. And well, what would it be like if you just let yourself just stay with that and experience that a little bit? Oh, now now I'm remembering something that happened with my father or something like that. I feel very sad, and then some tears come, or I feel my belly really strong, or I feel like I can't feel, I'm going numb as I talk about this. All the kinds of defenses that are intrinsic to the personality to keep people in that strategy to survive in the holding environment of their childhood, basically. I think we're really good at supporting people to go to those places that they haven't gone before, to allow themselves to feel it, to allow themselves to accept it, to allow themselves to be seen in it, and in that process to move through it and come in touch with a place that has been repressed or denied or not embodied because of that strategy to survive, because it wasn't allowed. And so then people are like, oh my God, this is me. This is how I used to feel, and then we support that quality to get deeper and more embodied. And embodiment is really a big part of it. It has to be in the body. It can't be abstract. It's not enough to understand it in the mind. It's not enough just to spit out some emotion about it. It has to come all the way into the body. And magic happens in the body when that's happening. It spreads through the body. It brings ecstatic, euphoric, beautiful, warm, loving, contactful feelings. It brings the quality of communion. You feel connected to all the other people. You feel connected with the divine and with the earth that we stand on. And that is, in one way of saying it, part of the beauty that happens in that process. Reflecting on all of this and seeing this really, I think, quite incredible journey of working on myself, being trained in many things, getting a lot of experience, I came to a point where I realized it was time to create a training. And the person I wanted to do it together with was Turiya, because we had so much experience in working together. And so we created Working with People trainings. And it's a 6-part training that happens over the course of a year. And we take 42 people usually. And it is us passing on a lot of what we've learned and put together and our particular way of working with people. It has a certain relationship to the essence work, to the trauma work, to the things that we learned with Osho and meditation and inquiry. And inquiry being that technique of self-discovery, which has been really, really curious about yourself and courageous in your look and loving, in looking at yourself and loving the truth, let's say, and compassionate towards yourself for the structure that you fixated into as a personality. And so in one way, we call the work that we do assisted inquiry. So there's a lack of intervention with the people. There's a lack of direction. It's more about holding presence and being present with people and helping them to discover in themselves the answers to the particular issue that they're exploring. And at the same time, have a body of knowledge behind you and a kind of map that gives you some kind of orientation and might help with posing questions to people that are really relevant. To say that there is absolutely objective experience where we're experiencing the world and what's happening around us in exactly the same way, you can't even know, because then if you go into trying to compare or talk about, you're already into subjectivity. It seems that there is objective realizations of the truth, and I like the image of the work being blowing the dust off the diamond, or burning through the false inside of us, and coming to being. And then even in being, I think there is still something subjective. Even if you're a profound non-dualist and you're saying that, there is absolutely no separation, which I've experienced, the experience of non-separation. But I don't know if my experience of that is the same as your experience of that. If I read things or hear something from somebody who's speaking from a really enlightened source, there's something inside of me that recognizes the truth in what they're saying that corresponds to something that I've experienced or that I know inside of myself, or it moves something inside of me that feels like, yes, that's it. A really interesting aspect, I think, about doing relationship work and also for self-reflection is to be always curious about yourself and anything that you're reacting to that's on the external, so that you don't go so much into a projection, which would be very much part of the personality, and then an entanglement with whatever you're projecting onto or whomever you're projecting onto, between that person's personality, their defensive structure, and your own inability to see what your reaction has to do with you. So what I make a real distinction between connection, which can be, we can feel connected to each other because we both did the path of love, or because we like the same football team, or creates a sense of camaraderie or connection. But there's something else that's called contact. And contact for me is like both people being home in themselves, residing here, you're residing there in yourself, in being. And there's a different quality that starts to happen at that point, and there's no projection at that point. The other person can be how they want. If I'm residing in my being and I'm present with myself, it doesn't much matter. Now, if I take that to my personal relationship with my partner, we're very aware between the two of us when we've slipped into our personalities and there's some projection happening or there's some separation in the field and lack of flow. And what our agreement is, let's stop for a moment and inquire. And so we stop and we take 10 minutes each and we only talk about ourselves. And that's difficult sometimes because I might be really activated about and think it's something to do with her. But if I'm curious about my reaction, I'm curious about what it is I'm experiencing right now, and I stay with that, and I track that through my body, through my senses, through my identification, and I'm willing to expose it, and I'm aligned with my love of truth more than my desire to be right, then I'm going to land in myself, and probably the presence of me being in myself, or my partner's presence of being in herself, is going to also inspire the other one to land in, and then there's real contact that happens. And in real contact, there's no effort, there's no trying, there's no agenda, there's just, I'm here, you're here, and there's a richness in the field. And what I'm really interested in is the field that's created in relationship, whether that's to a whole group or between two people. And I also believe everything that's going on inside of me or going on inside of the other registers in the field. So if I'm harboring negativity and I'm pretending that I'm not, and I'm just doing the normal social interaction with somebody, my negativity is going to find its way to register in the field and create separation. So it doesn't mean that I have to share with every person that comes along, oh, actually, I'm feeling really negative right now and I need to go in and do it. I can be doing that inside of myself while I'm socially interacting. And I have to say that's a skill. It's something that takes time to develop. The capacity and the willingness to inquire into myself about what's going on inside of me while I'm relating to another. And if that becomes really a high standard, then basically what I'm saying is I want to relate to you from a place of being rather than from my separate personality to your separate personality, with all of my beliefs and all of my self-images and all of my emotional baggage, and the same for whoever it is that I'm relating to. And maybe we find some common grounds where we kind of agree with each other and we feel connected, and but we're not really meeting in the depth of our potential. And I have a deep longing for meeting people in that place. I think it's really important for men to do men's work, to get to heal really a lot from what has been, that you can just say, transgenerational trauma of men, what we took from our fathers, what we didn't get from our fathers, what we're still aching for and needing, why we still behave like boys in so many ways, why we have so many insecurities around sexuality, why we don't know how to relate to women, we don't, all of that, the inheritance that we've gotten as men in our conditioning needs some straightening out. There is toxic masculinity. I absolutely recognize that. But it isn't that the masculine itself is toxic. The masculine itself is half of the equation, and it's beautiful, and it's pure, it's strong, it's powerful, and it's needed. And it doesn't take a tremendous amount of work to wake that up. That when men come together, the need for it is so present. And then the love that flows between men in that. It's not like fake kind of thing of all the guys slapping each other on the back or, behaving like men do in a bar sometime when they're drunk or something. I find it really deep and really nourishing to the soul. When I look back on the whole journey that I've been on, for one, I don't have any regrets. For two, I feel like blessed that I have an amazing life. I'm surrounded by amazing people. I've had a lot of spiritual experiences where I felt like one with existence, and even felt like that was the end. Couldn't possibly be more than that. And on a human level, I feel like the evolution is never going to end. May the learning never end. I'm not looking for it to end. I'm leaning into it. I'm still hungry. I'm still trying to be out at my edge and see what comes next. And may it be so until the moment it's time for me to go.